I'm always a little nervous getting up. I know everyone always is. But I always, every time I get the opportunity to, I jump up and I ask for opportunity, genuinely, because it is really, really special to me to be able to speak before any group of Christians, to spread any little part of God's Word that I can, to try and uplift and motivate and help push you along to your goal, which is heaven. But I really, really want to impress upon you tonight the impact that you have on other people. If you could speak at your own funeral, if you could give your own eulogy about your life and how you led it, about what you did, about the impact that you made on other people, what kind of characteristics would you say that you had about yourself? The problem with this, obviously, as you've seen, and you can think in your own minds while you're trying to think of what you would say, is that you never are going to be speaking at your own funeral. You never are the ones to give the account of your own life. It's always someone else in your life that speaks for you. It's always someone else that you made an impact on that spoke for you. And that's what I want to look at tonight. The legacy that has led others to be Christians. And what I want to use tonight is Abraham and his legacy that he left for his people, for his children, and for the people around him. My grandfather passed away early December of this past year. And that was the thing that impressed me the most, was not only the lessons I knew, but the lessons I never knew. People coming up to me even here that knew him, or that knew my grandmother, or knew my dad, that I never knew about. The lessons that they taught those people, and the impressions that they got upon those people, that really made a lasting impact on their lives. And I think if we place an importance in our day-to-day minds and how we purposefully live this life to make an impression on people, to know and to seek out those people that we know are looking at us, and really model our lives after Jesus Christ so that they then are affected by it. You could also say infected, I guess. Definitely. But tonight, like I said, we're going to look at Abraham and look at the legacy left by Abraham. This is a man that was walking with God, that was following after him in so many ways, and he was just doing what God told him to do. He was just leading the life that he thought he should lead, following the precepts that God was telling him to do. But his actions and his thoughts left an impression on the people around him, whether he meant to or not. The words that he said, the actions that he said, left an impression. And I want to look at 4 different points tonight. The first point that I want us to look at is the impact that he made on Lot in his life. In Genesis 13 is where we'll go to first. And then I want to look at the impact that he made on the people in Canaan, the people that weren't even of his tribe. And then I also want to look at the impact made by his deception, and the impact that was made on the mistakes that Abraham made in his life. And then I also want to finalize this by looking at Hebrews chapter 11 and how Abraham affects us today. So if we look first in Genesis chapter 13 at Abraham and Lot. And you're already there, I hope. But in Genesis chapter 13, we obviously know the story. Abraham and Lot separating. If you would look in Genesis chapter 13 and verse 5. It says, "Now Lot, who was moving about with Abraham, also had flocks and herds and tents. But the land could not support them while they stayed together, for their possessions were so great that they were not able to stay together. And quarreling arose between Abram's herders and Lot's. The Canaanites and the Perizzites were also living in the land at that time. So Abraham said to Lot, 'Let's not have any quarreling between you and me, or between your herders or mine, for we are close relatives. Is not the whole land before you? Let's part company. If you go to the left, I'll go to the right. If you go to the right, I'll go to the left.' And Lot looked around and saw that the whole plain of the Jordan toward Zoar was well watered, like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt. This was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. So Lot chose for himself the whole plain of the Jordan and set out towards the east. The two men parted company. Abram lived in the land of Canaan, while Lot lived among the cities of the plain and pitched tents towards Sodom. Now the people of Sodom were wicked and were sinning greatly against the Lord. As we see, obviously, and we've heard this story before, we know Abraham and Lot were together in their company. They were the same tribe, but they were getting too big for the area that they were living in. And so Lot said, we're going to separate. You pick the land, and I'll pick the other land, or I'll take the other land. Very selfless deed that Abraham put before Lot, that he let him choose, obviously. And we see an impact in that decision that Abraham made to let him have the land that was given to Lot. It was definitely a decision that caused Abram some trouble and some struggle. He took the hilly land of Canaan, and Lot took a little valley area, much more well-watered and much more fertile. But this impact was made very greatly on Lot. He also rescued Lot from the army of the kings. Also turned into the very next chapter, Genesis chapter 14. When Abram heard that his relatives had been taken captive, he called out the 318 trained men born in his household and went in pursuit as far as Dan. During the night, Abram divided his men to attack them. He routed them, pursuing them as far as Hobah, north of Damascus. He recovered all the goods and brought back his relative Lot and his possessions together. After Abram returned from defeating... Verse 16, he recovered all the goods and brought back his relative Lot and his possessions together with the woman and the other people. After Abram returned from defeating Kedorlaomer and the kings allied with him, the king of Sodom came out to meet him in the valley of Shapha, that is the king's valley. So this is a really cool story that we kind of gloss over, not because of any reason other than I think the king's names in this passage are very, very complicated. That's probably the hardest one, but all the others are much along the same lines. So in this story, we have basically 9 kings over small cities. 4 kings band together, and then 5 kings on the other side. These 5 kings are trying to rebel against kind of the head king of the area. And in this battle, the 5 kings actually are overtaken. And in those 5 kings are actually the king of Sodom and Gomorrah. So they have all their armies arrayed against each other. And this army of 5 kingdoms actually gets overthrown and pulled into the fray, and Lot's pulled with them. And then these 4 kings over here take all the treasures and all the spoils. And it works very much like a action movie, where Abraham then takes up his people after hearing that Lot was taken, and he goes and routs the men. Takes 318 of his own men. It's almost like the story of Gideon in a lot of ways. But he destroys the men, and drives them actually as far as Damascus. So I don't know the exact area that they were at that time, but I mean, we're talking like at least 50 miles, pushing them north towards Damascus from the place that they were at that time. A very, very impressive victory for Abram in a time where these 5 kings couldn't even take over the 4, but Abram was able to destroy them. Really showing protection for Lot, really showing protection of a relative and someone that he valued very greatly. And it definitely left an impression on Lot. In the next passage, we'll see that impression as well. We see Lot's character in Genesis chapter 19. This is the passage where he gets into the city of Sodom, and we see kind of the impact that that Abram has made on his life. In Genesis chapter 19. The 2 angels arrived at Sodom in the evening, and Lot was sitting in the gateway of the city. When he saw them, he got up to meet them and bowed down with his face to the ground. "My lords," he said, "please turn aside to your servant's house. You can wash your feet and spend the night, and then go on your way early in the morning." We can continue on that passage, but basically the angels say, "No, that's not a big deal." And Lot says, No, come with me. And I'm taking a little bit of liberty with this passage, but it very, very much seems that Lot is trying to protect these people. He's sitting at the gate of the city late at night, trying to pull these people that are coming in that are wandering from out in the wilderness. Why is he doing that? And I think we see in the rest of the passage why Lot is trying to protect these people. So he pulls these people in, whether or not he knows that they're angels. But he pulls these people in from the streets into his house to protect them. And he's trying to keep them away from the people. And we know this story. But he tries to keep them away from the people of Sodom to the point that the people in verse 9, we'll read that. So obviously Lot's battling with the people outside and trying to keep them from coming in the house. And in verse 9 he says, "Get out of our way," they replied. "This fellow came here as a foreigner, and now he wants to play the judge. We'll treat you worse than them." So I think with this passage we can see that Lot is definitely trying to play a moral card and definitely trying to keep A, these people from being taken advantage of, and B, also see that Lot is trying to influence the people around him, trying to affect those people that are there, to the point that these people are saying that he's a judge or trying to call him a judge, obviously mockingly, but obviously we see that he is actually trying to teach the people and trying to spread his influence. And I think one sad point to be made with this passage, with this thought, sometimes our influence can only go so far. Sometimes the things that we do, the life that we lead, can only affect people so far. Obviously, I think we can see that Abraham's life and his choices and his walk with God affected Lot. But Lot's life didn't look exactly the same. We know the stories with his wife turning into a pillar of salt, and then later on with his two daughters. It's kind of a sad story and a sad ending to a man that had been influenced so much by Abraham. But we need to continually focus on what kind of influence we're leaving on other people. And not only teaching them to obey God, but also teaching them to teach others to obey God. To continue on that lineage, to continue on the focus on God. Turn to 1 Timothy chapter 4. In verse 11. "Command and teach these things. Do not let anyone look down on you because you are young, but set an example for believers in speech, in conduct, in love, in faith, and in purity. Until I come, devote yourself to the public reading of Scripture, to preaching and to teaching. Do not neglect your gift, which was given to you through prophecy, when the body of elders laid their hands on you." So obviously we know the story with Timothy and with Paul. Paul was a great man, very much in the same similar position that Abraham was. A prophet of God, one that really spoke to the people and really tried to make them turn from their ways and also lead the charge of the church. He leaves the charge to Timothy to be that same person, to lead by example, to lead by the speech that you give and the way that you conduct yourselves. And that's the charge that I give to you tonight, the lesson that we can learn from the situation with Abram and Lot. We need to focus continually on how much we affect those people around us. Next thing I want to look at is his impact on the land of Canaan. I didn't go into too much of a detail about the background of what we have here in early Genesis, but obviously we have Shem, Ham, and Japheth in the time of Noah. They come off the ark, and one of the sons actually looks on the nakedness of Noah. This is actually a great offense to Noah, and obviously something that he did not like, because we see in the passage that he actually curses Ham's sons. But Shem is actually the ancestor to the people of Abraham's tribe. And so Abraham's tribe comes into this land as sojourners, as a people that are not accustomed to the area. They live in tents for their entire lives in this land that Noah actually cursed the people of. So he curses Canaan, and Canaan is the land that we see Abraham and Lot in at this time. So we see the impact in the passage that we're going to look at. But he affected these people even though they were very different from them. Maybe had different gods by that time, and maybe, and definitely, had different morals at that time. But we see a great effect that he has on them. we see this passage, we won't turn to it now, but we see the war with the kings of the land. And that towards the end of the passage, this is where we see Melchizedek come into play with Abraham. He actually routs and destroys the armies with his 318 men. He comes back with the spoils. And Melchizedek obviously receives a tenth of the portion. But the king of Sodom actually offers the rest of the spoils to Abraham. But Abraham says, no, I don't need this. He doesn't want that offering. He doesn't take the offering. And he actually says, because I don't want you to say that I made Abraham what he was. Definitely showing a separation from the people and from the tribes that were in the land of Canaan, but also showing just a reverence and a reliance on God in a lot of ways, that he did not want to take these spoils to make himself rich and make himself better. And we also see that impact through the actions and the death of Sarah. Turn to Genesis chapter 23 for me. Starting in verse 5. Well, I'll actually give some background here. So Sarah's passed away at this time. They're advanced in years. Isaac's already been born, and Sarah passes away. Obviously, with Abraham being a sojourner in the land without a place to call his home, and the only thing he's living in is a tent, he doesn't have any land to speak of. But he has his wife's body that he has to bury. In verse 5, Abraham is asked for the land. Abraham has said to the Hittites, saying, Can you offer me up any land that I can bury my wife in? And in verse 5, the Hittites replied to Abraham, Sir, listen to us. You are a mighty prince among us. Bury your dead in the choicest of our tombs. None of us will refuse you his tomb for burying your dead. Then Abraham rose and bowed down before the people of the land. The Hittites, he said to him, If you are willing to let me bury my dead, then listen to me and intercede with Ephron, son of Zohar, on my behalf. So he will sell me the cave of Machpelah, which belongs to him and is at the end of his field. Ask him to sell it to me for the price as a burial site among you. Ephron the Hittite was sitting among his people, and he replied to Abraham in the hearing. He said, No, my lord, listen to me. I give you the field, and I give you the cave that is in it. I give it to you in the presence of my people. Bury your dead. Again, Abraham bowed before the people of the land and said to Ephron in their hearing, Listen to me, if you will. I will pay the price of the field, accept it from me, so I can bury my dead there. Ephron answered to him, Listen to me, my lord. The land is worth 400 shekels of silver, but what is that between you and me? Bury your dead. So he pays the price of the field and buries Sarah in the land. Actually becomes the land of Hebron. I'm sure we've heard of that area before. But this is where he buries her. And this is actually the genesis to this sermon. I read this passage just in reading, and it really impacted me and really kind of made me think about how much of a influence Abraham must have had in this land. These people separated from the people that would end up being Abraham's tribe long ago, generations ago. They had birthed Sodom and Gomorrah, obviously, and they were in the same land. These people were not a very moral people. These people were not someone you would consider a great people in a lot of ways. They had some morals among them, obviously, as we see, but definitely not God's people as we would see. Very impactful to see a man make such an impression on these people that they offered this land up. They called him a prince. And imagine what it would be like living in Canaan, living with the Hittites, with the people of Sodom, and seeing this man off on the hill outside the city living in a tent. I wouldn't call him a prince at first if you saw this man, especially since he was living in tents outside the city. But this impression that he left on the people definitely lasted for a long time to the end of his life, to the point that they were willing to give the land free of charge. Obviously, Abraham didn't want to do that, though. And one last thing I want to look at is in Genesis 25 as well, with this point. Genesis chapter 25. This is actually Abraham's death. And just to give some a frame of reference with this section as well, we have Ishmael and Isaac. Ishmael's born first, and born first because of of Sarah's barren womb. Sarah offers her servant Hagar to Abraham to have a child so that he could actually continue his seed. But later on, once Ishmael is born and once Isaac is born as well, there's enmity between the brothers, and they separate. Sarah actually requests and requires of Abraham to send Ishmael off because he is basically making fun of Isaac. So he sends him off, and we see in the passage, once Abraham passes away, in Genesis chapter 25 and verse 8. Then Abraham breathed his last and died at a good old age, an old man and full of years. And he was gathered to his people. His sons Isaac and Ishmael buried him in the cave of Mount Machpelah near Mamre, in the field of Ephron, son of Zohar the Hittite, the field Abraham had brought from the Hittites. There Abraham was buried with his wife Sarah, and after Abraham's death, God blessed his son Isaac, who then lived near Beer-lahai-roi. The point that I want to make here is these two sons, these two brothers, we don't know the full extent of their enmity. We don't know the full extent of what was going on between the two, but we know that Ishmael had enough respect for his father to come from the land that he was then living in, because he was excommunicated from the area. Come back and bury his father. Come back and give him his final respect. That really tells the legacy of Abraham. Not only did he have these two sons, but he also had many other sons. After Sarah passes away, actually, he takes another wife and has several other children in this time. And I think a lot of times I hear people talking about the entire world had some semblance of a religion. Every culture on every continent that you see had some semblance of a religion. And oftentimes we see that and we think people were yearning for a God. And I absolutely believe that. There's something within us that deeply yearns for something besides ourselves. But also we see Abraham's people split off to all nations of the world. So we see Abraham's influence on those people split off. A respect for God, a respect for morals, a respect for other people spread out to the extent of the world. And I think we see that within every culture. We see Abraham's impact and his example. Turn with me to John chapter 13. Starting in verse 31. It said, when he was gone, Jesus said, now the Son of Man is glorified, and God is glorified in him. If God is glorified in him, God will glorify the Son in himself, and will glorify him at once. My children, I will be with you only a little longer. You will look for me, just as I told the Jews, so I will tell you now. Where I am going, you cannot come. And a new commandment I give to you, love one another as I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples if you love one another. Everyone will know that you're my disciples if you love one another. The impact that we can leave on the world today is that the cross of Christ and his baptism changes us to be a different kind of person. If they see us out in the world living the same way that we did before, they're going to say that there's no effect to Jesus Christ. There's no reason to look to this because they've been the same way that they were before. There's nothing different about this person. We must be different. We must have love for one another. And that's how everyone is going to see us as a changed person, as a disciple of Christ, and someone to be looked up to as a prince. Obviously, we're not all perfect people. Sometimes we don't always leave a good legacy. Sometimes we leave our mistakes and our faults. There's a passage in the Old Testament, and they refute it both times, but they say basically, you have a saying that the fathers eat sour grapes and the children's teeth are set on edge. Obviously, in both of those passages, if you look at them, he's basically saying that's not how that is. But we definitely see in this way, our mistakes can fall to our children. If we're showing them an example of always making this mistake or always sinning in this way, that's going to be seen. our actions are going to be seen by those around us. And Abraham's deceit is no different. Turn to Genesis chapter 20 for me. Starting in verse 1. Now Abraham moved on from there into the region of the Negev and lived between Kadesh and Shur. For a while he said to Gerar, and there Abraham, for a while he stayed in Gerar. And there Abraham said of his wife Sarah, she is my sister. And then Abimelech, king of Gerar, sent for Sarah and took her. But God came to Abimelech in a dream one night and said to him, you are as good as dead, because the woman you have taken, she is a married woman. Now Abimelech had not gone near her, so he said, Lord, will you destroy an innocent nation? Did he not say to me, she is my sister? And did not she also say, he is my brother? I have done this with a clear conscience and clear hands. Obviously, you see Abraham's deception in this case. We see that he is not a perfect man. This really seems to be his fatal flaw. For time's sake, we're not going to go to it, but this happened a couple of chapters ago in Egypt. He says the exact same thing, and the exact same thing happens. It's definitely Abraham's fatal flaw. But I think the reason that he lied, this really hits back to Andrew's sermon this morning. There's always a reason why we lie. A second sin behind the lie itself. In verses 10 through 13, we'll read that as well. Abimelech asked Abraham, what was your reason for doing this? Abraham replied, I said to myself, there is surely no fear of God in this place, and they will kill me because of my wife. Besides, she really is my sister, the daughter of my father, though not of my mother, and she became my wife. And when God had me wander from my father's household, I said to her, this is how you can show me your love to me. Everywhere we go, say of me, he is my brother. Abraham's problem was that he just didn't trust God well enough in these situations. Abraham definitely had much reason to trust God in these situations. Not only did he take out 4 or 5 armies with 318 men, he was given a son by Isaac. He had so many reasons to believe that God would fulfill his promises, yet in this way he did not trust God that he would be delivered from these people. He did not trust God that he would be spared, that he would not be taken or killed in this case. It's definitely a sad irony that this is Abraham's problem, because this is the opposite is true for what we remember Abraham for. We remember him as a person that was promised all these things, and he believed them, and it was accounted to him as righteousness. But in the same way, he could not trust God with sparing his own life. Like I said, we always leave a legacy, and in Genesis chapter 26, we see that exact legacy played out. And for time's sake, we're not going to go through it. You can look through it later. But literally the exact same story happens with his son. Isaac and Rebekah are in a land. It says Abimelech, it may be a different Abimelech. But the exact same thing happens. He says that she is my sister, which is even more of a lie because it's a little bit farther off from being a sister in this case. But we see this legacy of deceit and lying spread onto his son Isaac. And we won't go there for time as well, but Jacob keeps it going. We know the story of Jacob and Esau when he puts wool on his neck and on his arms to be given the birthright instead of his brother. This deceit continues. And we see that legacy played on. So my question to you tonight, what sin are you committing that the people that look up to you are seeing? What thing in your life do you do that these people are keeping in their hearts? That they are seeing in your own life and are going to replicate it later on. It may not be the secret sins. It may not be the things that we hide in our heart. But how we react to situations. How do we handle adversity? How do we do all these things? Do we trust God first or do we blame God first? In many other ways, we show that legacy to people around us, our children, not only them, but the people in church that see us. This legacy is left everywhere we go. Consider that. Consider that weakness that you have in your own life, and make changes for that. We'll finally turn to Hebrews chapter 11 as well. And we'll close out the lesson with this. Starting in verse 8. By faith, Abraham, when called to go to a place he would later receive as his inheritance, obeyed and went, even though he did not know where he was going. By faith, he made his home in the promised land like a stranger in a foreign country. He lived in tents, as did Isaac and Jacob, who were heirs with him of the same promise. For he was looking forward to a city with foundations, whose architect and builder is God. So we see this man leaving a legacy for us today. This man who lived so long ago that even when Hebrews was written, it was thousands of years before that Abraham walked this earth. He left the legacy for them in the time of Hebrews to not go back to your original country, to continue on in the place that you were living, even though you were a sojourner. You may be more at home back where you were at, but keep fighting forward because the home that you're going to is much better, as we see in the next passage. Verses 12 through 16. And so from this one man, and he, as good as dead, came descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky, and as countless as the sand on the seashore. All these people were still living by faith when they died. They did not receive the things promised. They only saw them and welcomed them from a distance, admitting that they were foreigners and strangers on the earth. People who say such things show that they are looking for a country of their own. If they had been thinking of the country they had left, they would have opportunity to return. Instead, they were longing for a better country, a heavenly one. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. This is the impact that Abraham has left on us today. That we are sojourners ourselves. That in this land, we have a lot of people that don't understand us. We're living in tents ourselves. We are a people without a home, living in a land that is not ours. We're not going to see the fruits until we move on. We're living here right now. This is not where we call home in any way. And Abraham made an impact on the people that he cared for in his family, as we can do today. And Abraham obviously made an impact on those people in the world that were not Christians. They weren't even believers in God. Did not have any semblance of respect for other people. To the point that we see in Abimelech, he would take a wife just because he saw a woman there. But these people that were in the same land respected him so much they called him a prince. How many people that we see in our day-to-day life would call us a Christian if they didn't know it already? We see, obviously, the mistakes that we make. But we can make up for those, and we can teach those people that we influence and come in contact with to not make those mistakes. We can push them forward just like we need to every day. If you have been making an influence on people in your life, that's wonderful. If you've maybe made a mistake and you see that you've made that mistake, we can help you here. You can come forward. We can pray for you. You can pray in your own time for that repentance. But if you haven't been baptized yet, you can't even make that. You can come forward, though, tonight or at any time to make that right, to change your life, and to start making your own legacy. If you would like to do that, please come and stand while we sing.
There's a great day.